What happens when America's most talked about former royal sits across from one of television's most respected journalists? At first glance, it feels like just another polished morning show interview. Bright smiles, polite greetings, and a studio glowing in CBS's signature shades of orange and blue. But beneath the smooth exterior, tension is waiting to rise. With every question, the atmosphere warms. Meghan's replies begin to sharpen, and Gayle's patience is quietly tested. By the time the discussion goes off track, viewers are left wondering if they just witnessed one of the most dramatic exchanges ever aired on morning television. The CBS studio buzzed with its usual energy. Crew members moved efficiently in the background, keeping noise to a minimum. Cameras rolled into place with precision, and the enormous screens displayed the familiar orange and blue design that millions of Americans connected to their daily routine. Gayle King, graceful as always, sat at the desk with her notes neatly prepared. Her calm yet authoritative voice carried the kind of presence that defined her career. Across from her sat Meghan Markle, dressed in a fitted navy blazer over a cream blouse, her hair falling in soft waves. Her posture was upright and intentional, giving off an image of control and confidence. To the casual viewer, she looked every bit the polished guest, ready to speak about her latest charitable work. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here this morning," Gayle began warmly, her smile lighting up the studio. "I know you've been working on a new initiative, and I think our viewers are eager to hear more about it." Meghan returned the smile, though hers seemed carefully measured, almost rehearsed. "It's always a pleasure, Gayle," she answered smoothly. "This initiative is about creating global awareness around issues people too often overlook. For me, it's about using my platform to highlight what truly matters." Gayle nodded, visibly impressed. "That sounds meaningful. Can you share what personally inspired you to take on this project?" For a short moment, Meghan's voice softened. She spoke about compassion, about her desire to make the world better for future generations. The audience responded with nods and polite applause. It all seemed perfectly aligned with what CBS producers had planned: uplifting, humanizing, hopeful. But Gayle, experienced in the art of interviewing, shifted slightly in her chair. Her welcoming smile remained, but her eyes sharpened. Leaning forward just a little, the way she always did before asking tougher questions, she prepared to take the conversation in a deeper direction. "Meghan," Gayle said gently, "you've often spoken about your personal truth, but there are people who question the consistency of your story. For example, when you told Oprah that you and Harry had a private wedding ceremony before the official one, the Archbishop later contradicted that. How do you reconcile that difference?" The tone in the studio changed immediately. Meghan's smile tightened for just a moment, subtle but noticeable to viewers at home. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer before answering. "Well, Gayle," she said, her voice now carrying a sharper edge, "I find it interesting how people choose to focus on technicalities instead of the emotional reality of what Harry and I experienced. What we shared was sacred to us. Whether others want to debate the details doesn't change our truth." Gayle gave a slow nod, her expression calm but probing. "I understand, but some would argue that truth should be universal, not just personal, especially when it's shared so publicly." A faint laugh slipped from Meghan's lips, one that carried a hint of dismissal. "With all due respect, Gayle, you weren't there. Neither was the Archbishop in every private moment of our lives. It's easy to comment from the outside, but you didn't live it." The audience shifted in their seats. The atmosphere of polite morning show conversation had begun to dissolve. Meghan's tone, a touch sharper, carried an air of superiority that made Gayle's brow crease slightly.
Still, Gayle pressed forward with composure.
"Fair point," Gayle continued smoothly. "But let's also look at another example. You've said in past interviews that you received no media training before entering royal life, yet some palace insiders have claimed you had extensive briefings. Would you say they're lying?" This time Meghan's smile vanished. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Palace insiders?" she repeated with a hint of disdain. "Anonymous voices who built their entire careers on protecting an outdated institution. Forgive me if I don't validate their stories. I lived through it, Gayle. I know the truth." Again, the sharpness in her tone was hard to miss. Meghan wasn't just answering the question. She was brushing it aside, dismissing it entirely. Gayle inhaled slowly, her face calm, but her patience thinning. Years of live television had taught her to remain composed under pressure, but she could feel the tension building. She glanced briefly at the studio clock, aware there was still plenty of show left to fill. The audience felt it too. The polite clapping from earlier had stopped completely. Viewers at home would later say they could sense it through the screen, that something was about to snap. Gayle steadied herself, adjusting the notes in front of her. She had more questions to ask, questions the audience expected. Meghan, meanwhile, leaned back slightly in her chair, her chin lifting just a fraction, her posture daring Gayle to push further. The calm before the storm was over. The storm itself had only just begun. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter, or perhaps it only felt that way. Meghan sat back with the poise of someone holding court, fingers laced neatly in her lap, chin tilted at a deliberate angle. Gayle King, though still professional, felt the shift in the air. The interview had moved far from Meghan's new charity project. Now it was a test of patience and control, and Gayle was determined not to lose her balance. So, Meghan, Gayle began carefully, in your Oprah interview, you spoke about feeling isolated and unsupported during your pregnancy. You even said you were denied mental health assistance. Yet some former palace staff insist that resources were available to you. How do you respond to that? Meghan's smile returned, but this time it was thin, almost patronizing. Her voice was calm but carried an edge. Gayle, it's very easy for people to rewrite history when they've never lived my life. People love to act as if they know what went on behind closed doors. The reality is I was the one there. I was the one suffering. If others claim otherwise, perhaps they're more interested in protecting the monarchy than telling the truth. Her words were coated in sweetness, but the sting underneath was unmistakable. Gayle nodded politely, though she pressed again. I understand. But wouldn't you agree that when multiple accounts exist, people are naturally going to question the accuracy of your version? They'll want consistency. Meghan gave a sharp laugh, one that sounded more dismissive than amused. Consistency, Gayle? The only thing consistent has been the smear campaign against me. I've faced lies, distortions, and half-truths for years. The idea that I owe explanations to anonymous sources is laughable. Maybe they should spend less time leaking to the press and more time reflecting on their own failures. The studio audience stirred uneasily. Meghan's words were not the careful, polished answers most expected on a morning show. They were blunt, defensive, and laced with disdain. Gayle inhaled deeply, grounding herself in years of experience. But Meghan's tone was pressing against her patience like a weight. She moved her note card slowly, buying herself a moment before continuing. All right, Gayle said, her voice calm but firmer. Let's pivot slightly. You've often said you wanted to step away from the royal family to live a more private life. Yet you've written books, filmed documentaries, and given several high-profile interviews. How do you reconcile the desire for privacy with such a public presence? Meghan's smile sharpened. Gayle, privacy doesn't mean silence. Privacy means having control over what we share. Just because I refuse to be silenced by the palace or the press doesn't mean I gave up my right to privacy. Honestly, I find the question insulting. I don't need to justify my choices to anyone, least of all to critics who thrive on hypocrisy. The audience murmured again. This was no longer a guest politely promoting a cause. This was a woman on the offensive, batting down every question as though it were beneath her. Gayle tilted her head, her voice still measured. I'm not trying to insult you, Meghan. I'm just trying to understand the balance you're describing. Meghan's reply was immediate, sharp. Then perhaps you should try harder, Gayle. Because implying that my husband and I don't deserve to tell our story is absurd. The fact that I even need to explain this shows how deep the bias still runs. Gasps rippled across the studio. Meghan's arrogance was no longer subtle, it was front and center. She wasn't just rejecting the questions. She was lecturing, dismissing, and standing above them. Gayle's eyes flickered, the first small crack in her calm exterior. She pressed her palms together, her voice even but edged with steel. I hear you, Meghan, but I also think viewers want clarity. These aren't just criticisms from the palace. These are questions people genuinely have. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her voice dripping with superiority. And maybe the public should stop expecting me to spoon-feed them answers to every little doubt. My life is not a public trial. I don't owe anyone, palace staff, critics, or viewers, an explanation for my choices. The words dropped heavily in the room. Even Gayle seemed momentarily taken aback. The CBS control room considered cutting to a commercial break. For a moment, producers debated whether the conversation had gone too far, but they also knew what they were witnessing. Live television at its most gripping. Gayle adjusted her glasses, her calm voice now carrying a firmer edge. I respect that you feel you don't owe explanations, but when you make public statements that influence how millions view one of the world's oldest institutions, people are going to ask questions. That isn't bias, that's journalism. Meghan tilted her head, a faint smirk curving on her lips. And I respect that you believe this is journalism, Gayle, but let's be honest, this isn't about truth. It's about entertainment. And if what you wanted was a spectacle, then congratulations. You've got it. The audience gasped loud enough for microphones to pick up. The studio fell into a sharp silence. Gayle's expression remained controlled, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fire. She had interviewed presidents, survivors, world leaders, people with far greater stakes than a celebrity interview. Yet she had rarely been spoken to with such open condescension. Still, her voice remained steady. "We're here for an honest conversation, Meghan. That's all." Meghan leaned back, arms crossed, her smirk unchanged. "Then maybe you should learn to ask honest questions instead of repeating palace spin." The words hung in the air like a slap. Gayle's composure held, but the tension in the room thickened. Even viewers at home could sense the heat rising. The audience inside the studio shifted in their seats, unsure how to react. Every question from Gayle remained calm, measured, and respectful. But every answer from Meghan was sharper, dismissive, and tinged with superiority. It was no longer an interview, it was a standoff. "So, Meghan," Gayle said carefully, "you've often spoken about wanting to focus on service. Could you share what service means to you now, outside the monarchy?" Meghan let out a short laugh and shook her head slightly as though the question didn't deserve an answer. "Gayle, I think it's obvious. Service is about impact, not titles. That's something I've been saying for years. The fact that people still need me to explain it shows how far behind society is." Her tone was sharp, her body language closed. Arms crossed, chin lifted, she leaned back in her chair. Gayle nodded slowly, acknowledging the response but gently pressing further. "I hear you. But some would argue that your projects, your books, documentaries, interviews, seem more focused on telling your personal story than serving others. How do you respond to that perception?" Meghan smirked again. "Perception is shaped by bias, Gayle. People determined to see me as self-serving will never recognize the work I've done. It isn't my job to correct their ignorance." The audience murmured again, unsettled. Meghan's words weren't just sharp, they carried open contempt, directed not only at Gayle but also at critics and even the public. Gayle's voice stayed smooth. "I understand, Meghan. But let's talk specifics. With your new project, how does it build on or differ from your past initiatives?" Meghan waved her hand dismissively as though brushing off an irrelevant detail. "It's not about being different. It's about continuing the legacy I've already built. Honestly, Gayle, I sometimes feel these questions are redundant. My record speaks for itself." A quiet gasp spread through the studio. Meghan hadn't only dismissed the question, she had dismissed Gayle herself. Gayle looked at her for a long moment, lips pressed tightly. She took a deep breath. She had been patient. She had been professional. But Meghan's tone was crossing into outright disrespect. Still, Gayle tried once more to keep the interview on track. "Meghan, I think our viewers appreciate details. They want to understand not just what you're doing, but why. Can you share one specific example?" Meghan rolled her eyes, a small movement but caught clearly on camera. "Gayle, with all due respect, I didn't come here to read off bullet points like a press release. If people are truly interested, they can find all the details on our website. I don't need to spoon-feed information." This time the gasp from the audience was audible and immediate. Gayle's hand tightened around her note cards, but her voice stayed even. "I see. Well, some might argue that when you appear on national television, the expectation is that you'll share those details directly with the public. That's part of accountability." Meghan leaned forward, her voice firm and dismissive. "Accountability? Gayle, I've been held accountable every single day since I married into that family. If anything, I've been scrutinized more than anyone else. So forgive me if I don't feel the need to bend over backwards to satisfy critics who'll never support me anyway." The dismissiveness in her voice was like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Gayle sat up straighter now, her professional mask beginning to slip. "Meghan," she said, her tone firmer, "I'm not your critic. I'm doing my job. My viewers expect me to ask the questions that matter. And frankly, the way you're responding right now..." She stopped herself, taking a breath, choosing restraint. "It doesn't make it easy for people to see the sincerity of your message." Meghan let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "Maybe that's because sincerity makes people uncomfortable. Gayle, maybe you and your viewers simply aren't ready for someone who refuses to play the game." The words cut sharply. The audience stirred restlessly. Some showed sympathy for Gayle, others sat stunned by Meghan's boldness. Gayle slowly placed her notes down on the desk. For the first time, she looked directly at Meghan with clear irritation in her eyes. "Meghan, nobody here is asking you to play a game. What they're asking for is respect. Respect for the questions, respect for the audience, respect for the platform you're using." Meghan smirked once more, her voice dripping with superiority. "And maybe, Gayle, respect should be mutual." The studio went silent. The tension was heavy, unshakable. Gayle's hands remained still, but her eyes burned. The breaking point was near. The calm surface of CBS Mornings was about to shatter. For a few long seconds, silence filled the studio. The cameras caught everything. Meghan's smirk, Gayle's tightened jaw, the audience frozen in their seats. It was no longer just an interview. It was a battle being fought under blinding studio lights. Gayle leaned forward, her voice lower now, more deliberate. Meghan, I've been in this chair a long time. I've spoken with survivors of war, with mothers who've lost children, with leaders carrying the weight of nations. Never, not once, have I been spoken to the way you've spoken to me today. The audience shifted, the weight of her words landing heavily. Meghan tilted her chin, unbothered, her voice calm but sharp. Then maybe, Gayle, it's time someone did. Maybe you're not used to being challenged. That doesn't mean I'm wrong for doing it. Gasps echoed. Meghan wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. Gayle's eyes narrowed, her patience finally cracking. Challenged? Meghan, asking you basic questions about your work isn't a challenge, it's accountability. What you've shown here today isn't strength. It's arrogance. The words landed like a thunderclap. The audience gasped again, louder this time. The control room scrambled, producers waving frantically, but it was too late. The moment had arrived. Meghan's smile faltered for the first time. Her voice was still firm, but her composure slipped. Arrogance? No, Gayle. What's arrogant is assuming that you or anyone has the right to question my truth. Gayle leaned in, her voice cutting clear, unflinching. No, Meghan. What's arrogant is sitting here, dismissing every question, brushing aside every doubt, and expecting the world to applaud you anyway. That's not truth. That's entitlement. The audience broke into shocked murmurs, some clapping nervously, others staring wide-eyed. It was a clash unlike anything morning television had ever seen. Meghan's cheeks flushed, though she tried to hold her composure. Her words came slower now, edged with anger. You know what, Gayle? If people can't handle me speaking honestly, that's their problem, not mine. I didn't come here to beg for approval. Gayle sat back, her voice calm again, but it carried finality. Then maybe this conversation has reached its end. The studio went silent once more. Meghan stared back, her smirk gone, her eyes cold. For the first time in the interview, she didn't have a quick retort. The control room cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. Within hours, clips of the exchange would dominate social media. Headlines would scream about Meghan's arrogance, Gayle's breaking point, and the morning show interview that turned into a televised standoff. For Meghan, it was another storm in a life already full of storms. For Gayle, it was proof that even the most seasoned journalist could be pushed to the edge. And for the world watching, it was unforgettable.